The chandelier cast fractured light across Daniel Carter's hands as he tightened the last bolt on the compressor housing. 6:43 on a Friday evening, and somewhere above him, 200 wealthy people were drinking champagne they'd forget by morning. His father's voice surfaced, the way it always did when Daniel worked with machinery that hummed back to life under his touch. "You can't fix what you don't understand, son." The old man had been talking about engines and refrigeration systems and the honest work that kept buildings standing. But Daniel had learned over 32 years that the principle applied to people too, especially to the broken ones who didn't know they needed fixing. He wiped grease from his palms onto the rag hanging from his belt and checked the pressure gauges one final time. The backup HVAC system stuttered, caught, then settled into a steady rhythm that would keep the Grandview Hotel's ballroom at a comfortable 72 degrees. 2 hours of work in a basement mechanical room, while Pittsburgh's elite celebrated whatever it was rich people celebrated on Friday nights in March. The manager would be relieved. The guests would never know their comfort had been 30 minutes from collapse. That morning had started the way every morning started in the small house on Allegheny Avenue. Daniel's alarm went off at 5:45, and he lay in the dark for exactly 3 minutes before the weight of single fatherhood pulled him vertical. Tyler's door was cracked open the way he'd left it. The 8-year-old sprawled across his bed in a tangle of dinosaur print sheets. The boy could sleep through anything except the specific creak of Daniel's work boots on the hallway floor. The coffee maker sputtered to life while Daniel pulled eggs from the refrigerator and bread from the cabinet above the stove. Tyler appeared at 6:23, hair sticking up in directions that defied physics, rubbing sleep from eyes that were his mother's only legacy before she'd walked out 6 years ago. "Dad, can Emma come over this Saturday?" Daniel's hands moved through the familiar choreography of scrambling eggs while his brain processed the question. Emma, the deaf girl Tyler had been asking about for 3 weeks, ever since Daniel had mentioned meeting her at a service call. "We'll see, buddy. Her mom is very busy." Tyler's expression shifted into something that looked too old for 8 years. "Emma says her mom never has time." "That's sad." The words sat wrong in Daniel's chest. Sad didn't cover what Daniel had seen in that little girl's eyes when he'd crouched beside her chair at a charity gala 2 weeks ago. Abandoned was closer. Invisible was more accurate. But Tyler didn't need those words, not yet. Not when childhood should still be simple. "Yeah, Ty, it is sad." The drive to Tyler's school took 17 minutes through Lawrenceville's morning traffic. Daniel watched his son disappear into the building where hearing kids and deaf kids learned side by side. A program that existed because someone had decided language barriers were just another problem that could be solved. Tyler waved from the entrance, his hands already moving in the sign language he'd absorbed the way kids absorbed everything when they weren't old enough to know it was supposed to be difficult. Precision Climate Control's dispatch office smelled like burnt coffee and the particular desperation of emergency service work. Daniel clocked in at 7:38 and found Marcus Jenkins already 2 calls deep into a day that would stretch past dinner. "Man, you look tired. Tyler keep you up?" Daniel poured coffee that tasted like regret into a styrofoam cup and checked the assignment board. 6 emergency calls scattered across Pittsburgh's zip codes, each one a small crisis that would resolve itself the moment Daniel showed up with his tools and the knowledge that came from 10 years of crawling through mechanical rooms. "Nah, just thinking about Rachel again. Her birthday would have been yesterday." Mark's face shifted into the expression of someone who'd heard this story enough times to know when to push and when to let silence do the work. They'd gone through trade school together, worked the same brutal apprenticeship schedules, survived the same winters where heating systems failed and desperate families called at 3 in the morning. Mark knew about Daniel's sister the way brothers knew things, with the kind of understanding that didn't require constant explanation. 10 years, D, you gotta let that go." Daniel's jaw tightened around words that wanted to come out sharp and defensive. "I'll let it go when people stop making the same mistakes my father did." The first call was a restaurant on Penn Avenue where the walk-in freezer had decided to quit overnight. Daniel arrived at 8:15 to find the owner standing amid $10,000 of inventory that had 6 hours before temperature made it dangerous. The compressor had overheated, coolant was leaking from a seal that should have been replaced 2 years ago during regular maintenance. Daniel worked fast, hands moving through diagnostics that were second nature, replacing the seal, purging the lines, recalibrating the system until the temperature gauge started its slow crawl back towards zero. The owner pressed 220s into Daniel's hand despite the invoice that would bill the company directly. "You're a lifesaver. My wife would have killed me if we lost everything." Daniel pocketed the cash that would cover Tyler's library fines and the pizza they'd share tonight. "Just doing my job, sir." But the truth was more complicated. His job wasn't glamorous. He didn't wear suits or attend meetings in boardrooms or make decisions that moved stock prices. When families had no heat in January, when businesses faced inventory loss, when hospitals needed their refrigeration systems operational, Daniel was the one they called. That mattered in ways that couldn't be measured in salary or status. It mattered in ways his father had never understood, too busy chasing respectability to recognize that honest work had its own dignity. The next 4 calls blurred together into a montage of failed systems and grateful clients. An office building where the AC had quit in 85-degree temperatures made concentration impossible. An apartment complex where elderly residents sat in front of oscillating fans that did nothing against Pittsburgh's unseasonable March heat. A retail store where refrigeration failure threatened dairy products and the manager's quarterly bonus. Each call was a problem, and Daniel understood completely. Solved methodically, left better than he'd found it. Mark called at 4:30 while Daniel was elbow deep in a residential unit that had been installed incorrectly by someone who'd skipped the chapters on proper drainage. "Got one more for you, Grandview Hotel. Main ballroom HVAC is down and they've got some charity gala tonight." Manager's freaking out. Daniel checked his watch. Tyler was at the after-school program until 6. He could squeeze in one more call, maybe even make it home in time for dinner. "I'm on it." The Grandview Hotel rose 34 floors above Pittsburgh's downtown corridor, all glass and steel, and the kind of calculated elegance that separated people who belonged from people who serviced the machinery. Daniel parked his work truck in the service entrance and hauled his toolbox through corridors that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and other people's money. The maintenance manager met him in the basement mechanical room with the specific panic of someone whose job depended on systems working flawlessly during high-profile events. "Thank God you're here. Ballroom's at 78 degrees and climbing. Gala starts in 90 minutes. If we can't cool it down, the Hartwell Foundation that is going to have my head." Daniel assessed the situation with the kind of clinical detachment that came from seeing every possible failure mode. The main compressor had suffered a bearing failure, metal grinding against metal in a way that meant replacement, not repair. The backup system was running but overloaded, compensating for capacity it was never designed to handle. Timeline-wise, a full repair would take 3 hours minimum, but Daniel could stabilize the backup, redistribute the cooling load, buy them enough capacity to get through the evening. "I can get your backup system stable in 30 minutes. Main repair takes longer, but you'll have AC. Just reduce capacity." The manager's relief was visible, visceral. "Do it. Whatever it takes." Daniel worked methodically, the way his instructors at Pittsburgh Technical Institute had drilled into him during 2 years of classroom theory and hands-on practice. Pressure readings, coolant levels, electrical systems. The backup compressor responded to adjustments the way a well-tuned instrument responded to a musician who understood its language. 37 minutes later, the temperature in the ballroom had dropped 3 degrees and was trending downward. The manager shook Daniel's hand with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just avoided unemployment. "You saved the evening. The guests won't even know there was a problem." Daniel packed his tools while the manager disappeared to reassure whoever needed reassuring. That was the point, wasn't it? People like him worked in basements and crawl spaces and mechanical rooms, invisible infrastructure that allowed visible success. The guests upstairs would sip champagne and congratulate themselves on their charitable contributions, never knowing that Daniel Carter's calloused hands were the reason they weren't sweating through their evening gowns and tailored suits. He should have left through the service exit, retraced his steps through the utilitarian corridors where workers moved like ghosts. But the shortest path to the parking garage cut through the ballroom, and Daniel had 40 minutes before he needed to pick up Tyler. 40 minutes that wouldn't matter to anyone except a man who'd spent 12 hours fixing other people's problems. The ballroom hit him like a physical thing, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than Daniel made in a year. 200 people in formal wear that required tailors and personal shoppers, and the kind of disposable income that made $300 dresses seem reasonable. Champagne flowed like water, while servers in black vests navigated between tables laden with appetizers Daniel couldn't name. He moved along the perimeter, toolbox in hand, work uniform marking him as clearly as if he'd been wearing a sign. Security tracked him with eyes trained to identify people who didn't belong, but his ID badge and the manager's earlier panic gave him a temporary pass through this world. That's when he saw her, small girl in navy velvet, sitting alone at a corner table while conversations and laughter flowed around her like water around a stone. Her hands were folded with the kind of unnatural stillness that came from practice, from learning that movement drew attention and attention led nowhere good. A tablet sat in front of her with headphones attached, the specific irony that would have been funny if it wasn't heartbreaking. Daniel stopped walking. The girl's mother was 30 feet away, elegant in silver, working the room with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly how valuable her time was and exactly how to spend it. Beautiful in the way that came from genetics and expensive maintenance, commanding attention without seeming to try. She laughed at something an older man said, touched his arm with calculated warmth, moved through the social choreography like someone who'd been trained since birth. Her daughter sat alone. Daniel had seen this before, not at galas or charity events, but in the suffocating quiet of his parents' living room when Rachel was 6 and their father brought her to company functions because babysitters were expensive. The same frozen stillness, the same invisible isolation, the same desperate hope that someone, anyone would see her. He should have kept walking, should have exited through the service quarter and picked up Tyler and gone home to the small house where life was manageable because he'd learned to keep the variables controlled. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't his responsibility. This wasn't his daughter. But God, she looked exactly like Rachel. Daniel set his toolbox down carefully, aware that 200 pairs of eyes could turn his direction at any moment. He crossed the remaining distance to the girl's table with the steady purpose of someone who'd made a decision and intended to see it through. When he reached her chair, he crouched down to her eye level, knees on marble that would wrinkle his work pants. His hands moved before his brain caught up with all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Hello, my name is Daniel. The girl's head snapped up so fast Daniel worried about whiplash. Her eyes went wide, brown and disbelieving, locked on his hands like they were the first real thing she'd seen in hours. Maybe they were. Her own hands rose slowly, hesitant, like someone testing whether a mirage was solid. You know sign language? Daniel's chest did something complicated. Relief and grief and recognition all tangled together in a way that made breathing difficult. Yes, I learned when I was young. What's your name? Emma. I'm Emma. Nobody here knows how to talk to me. The words came out in a rush of signs that were too fast, too eager, years of stored conversation trying to escape all at once. Daniel signed back with the fluid ease of someone who'd been bilingual since childhood, whose second language had been necessity before it became choice. The transformation was immediate and complete. The frozen statue became an animated 8-year-old, hands moving through stories about the book she was reading, about school, about how boring this party was and how nobody ever talked to her at these things because grown-ups forgot she existed. Daniel asked questions about her book, made jokes about dinosaurs that Tyler would have appreciated, watched Emma laugh for what was probably the first time all evening. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Emma was mid-sign about time travel physics when Daniel felt the change in air pressure that meant someone was approaching fast. Excuse me, who are you and what are you doing with my daughter? The voice was cold, controlled, carrying the particular authority of someone used to being obeyed immediately. Daniel looked up at Emma's mother and understood in one glance why the girl had learned to be invisible. This woman was ice-wrapped in silk, beautiful and untouchable, her expression cycling through confusion and fear, and something else that looked disturbingly like jealousy. Daniel stood slowly, gave Emma's shoulder a gentle squeeze that he hoped communicated safety and reassurance. Daniel Carter, Precision Climate Control. I was repairing your hotel's HVAC system. He gestured toward the mechanical room entrance with grease-stained hands that told their own story. Finished up, was heading out when I saw Emma sitting alone. Thought she might appreciate some company. The woman's face remained frozen in that careful mask wealthy people wore when they couldn't quite decide how to feel. You can't just approach someone's child without permission. Daniel met her eyes directly, refusing to look away first. You're absolutely right. I apologize. He let the pause sit for 3 seconds. But ma'am, your daughter has been sitting alone at that table for over 2 hours while you worked the room. I figured talking to her was less harmful than ignoring her. The woman's face flushed, and Daniel felt a small, mean satisfaction watching the mask crack. Emma started signing frantically, her expression crumpling from joy to fear that she'd done something wrong. The woman looked at her daughter, tried to sign something back, but her hands formed meaningless shapes that might have been alphabet letters arranged randomly. Daniel's anger, which he'd been keeping carefully controlled, slipped its leash. She's asking me to explain to you that she's not in trouble, that she enjoyed talking to me, that I'm nice. The woman tried again to sign to Emma, and the result was painful to watch. Wrong hand positions, backwards letters, the grammatical equivalent of someone who'd seen a foreign language written down but never heard it spoken. Emma's face fell, and Daniel saw Rachel in that moment of resignation, the specific defeat that came from trying to communicate with someone who refused to learn. Ma'am, I don't know you. I don't know your situation. Daniel kept his voice level, professional, but every word was chosen for maximum impact. But I know your daughter has been in a room full of people for hours, and nobody spoke her language until a stranger in a work uniform showed up. I know that when I signed to her, she looked at me like I'd just given her oxygen after drowning. And I know that you just tried to communicate with your own child and couldn't form a single correct sign. He let the words land, watched them hit like physical blows. So here's my question. How long have you been her mother? 7 years? 8? How much longer are you planning to wait before you learn how to actually talk to her? The woman's hands shook, and Daniel recognized the emotion finally breaking through. Shame. Good, she should be ashamed. You have no right. Her voice was steel-wrapped in fury, but Daniel had momentum now, and the weight of 10 years of grief pushing him forward. I had a sister, Rachel, deaf from birth, just like Emma. The ballroom noise continued around them, but this moment existed in its own isolated bubble. My father spent years refusing to learn ASL. Too busy, too proud, always had an excuse. Daniel's throat tightened, but he pushed through. Rachel got sick when she was 10. Meningitis, 48 hours from healthy to hospital to dead. The woman's anger drained visibly, replaced by something that looked like horror. In her last moments, she tried to sign something to my father. He was holding her hand, crying, begging her to fight, but he couldn't understand what she was saying. She died trying to tell him something he'd never know. Daniel's voice cracked slightly, but he refused to stop now. I was 15. I could sign. I watched my baby sister die and my father break because he'd waited too long. He stepped closer, dropped his voice so only she could hear. So yeah, maybe I don't have the right to judge your parenting, but I'll be damned if I watch another little girl grow up feeling like she's invisible to her own mother. The silence between them was absolute. Around them, the gala continued its oblivious celebration. But here in this small radius of space, truth hung heavy and undeniable. Emma signed something urgent, her small face anxious. Daniel looked down at her, forced his expression into something gentler. What did you tell her? The woman's voice was barely audible. Daniel signed to Emma with careful deliberation. I told her that you're wonderful, and that she's lucky to have you, and that sometimes parents need help learning how to listen. He pulled a business card from his wallet, slightly bent and smudged with grease, but readable. Here's my card. I volunteer teaching basic ASL to hearing families on Saturdays at East Liberty Library. 10 a.m., free. He pressed the card into her unresisting hand. Your daughter deserves a mother who can talk to her. You still have time. Rachel's father didn't. Daniel signed goodbye to Emma, whose eyes were swimming with confusion and something that might have been hope. He picked up his toolbox, felt the weight of every tool inside it, and every choice that had led him to this moment. He walked toward the exit without looking back, aware that security was probably tracking him, that he'd probably crossed lines that would get him banned from future service calls at the Grandview Hotel. He didn't care. The drive home took 23 minutes through Friday evening traffic that crawled like everything in Pittsburgh crawled when people were trying to reach weekend safety. Daniel's hands were tight on the steering wheel, adrenaline fading into something that felt dangerously close to regret. His phone buzzed at a red light. Mark's name lit up the screen. How'd the Grand View job go? Daniel put the call on speaker, kept his eyes on traffic. Fixed the system. Might have wrecked a rich lady's evening, though. Mark's laugh crackled through the speaker. What did you do? Told her the truth. Probably shouldn't have. The light turned green. Daniel accelerated through the intersection. About Rachel? Yeah. Mark's voice shifted into something quieter. You okay, man? No, but I will be. The house on Allegheny Avenue looked exactly the same as it had 12 hours ago, small and solid, and full of the specific clutter that came from single fathers raising sons. Mrs. Patterson answered the door with Tyler bouncing at her elbow, 8-year-old energy that had been contained all day and was ready to explode. Daniel thanked her, paid her $15 an hour that made his budget uncomfortable, watched Tyler launch into a detailed explanation of something that had happened during recess involving a substitute teacher and a misunderstanding about sign language. Did you fix the hotel, Dad? Daniel hung his work jacket on the hook by the door, felt exhaustion settling into his bones. Yeah, buddy, all fixed. Did you meet anyone cool? The question was innocent, just Tyler being Tyler, but Daniel thought about Emma's face lighting up when someone finally spoke her language. Actually, yeah, a little girl who reminds me of Aunt Rachel. Tyler's expression shifted into the carefully serious face he wore when adults said things that mattered. Really? Is she deaf too? She is, and brave, and very alone. Are you gonna help her? Daniel pulled Tyler into a hug that was partly comfort and partly seeking comfort. I don't know if I can, Ty, but I hope her mom will. Later, after Tyler was asleep and the house was quiet except for the refrigerator's hum, Daniel sat in the living room with lights off and memory sharp. He went to the closet where he kept things that hurt too much to look at regularly, pulled out the box that held Rachel's last letter to him. The handwriting was shaky, 10-year-old penmanship struggling with English words that didn't come naturally when your first language was visual. Dear Daniel, thank you for being the only one who listens to me. I love you. Rachel. She'd written it 3 weeks before the meningitis hit, 3 weeks before their father held her dying hand and couldn't understand her final words. 3 weeks before Daniel's world split into before and after, into the brother who'd had a sister and the brother who carried her ghost. Daniel cried quietly, the kind of tears that came from 10 years of unprocessed grief and the fresh wound of watching another little girl sit alone in rooms full of people who couldn't hear her. He cried until his chest hurt and his eyes burned, and exhaustion finally pulled him towards something that might pass for sleep. Across Pittsburgh, in a penthouse that cost more than Daniel made in 5 years, Victoria Morgan sat in her car with her daughter and tried 3 times to sign something, anything that might bridge the distance between them. Each attempt ended in failure, Emma's face cycling from hope to resignation as her mother's hands fumbled through shapes that meant nothing. They drove in the familiar silence that Victoria had told herself was peaceful, was just their dynamic, was fine because Emma's had everything else she needed. The city lights blurred past the windows while Emma stared out at a world she navigated without sound, without her mother's voice, without anyone asking her what she thought about anything. Home was 30 floors above street noise, all glass and polished surfaces, and the kind of carefully curated emptiness that interior designers called minimalist. Emma went straight to her room without the goodnight ritual Victoria couldn't remember them ever establishing. Victoria poured wine she didn't drink, stood in the kitchen where she made decisions about million-dollar contracts, but couldn't figure out how to talk to her own child. The refrigerator held one of Emma's drawings, attached with magnets that were shaped like letters Emma would never hear. Victoria had thought it was abstract art when Emma first brought it home from school. 2 stick figures on opposite sides of the page, a thick black line between them. Now, with Daniel Carter's words echoing in her skull, Victoria understood it was a map, a diagram of their relationship, a 7-year-old's attempt to explain to anyone who'd looked that she was drowning and nobody was reaching. Daniel's business card sat on the granite counter, slightly bent, marked with a specific wear of something carried in a working man's wallet. Victoria picked it up, read the information printed in standard font. Daniel Carter, Climate Control Technician, Precision Climate Control. Saturday ASL classes. East Liberty Library, 10 a.m. She opened her laptop, typed with the decisive keystrokes of someone who made decisions for a living. How to learn American Sign Language, Pittsburgh. The search returned 2.3 million results in 0.42 seconds, each one a reminder that she was 7 years late to a language her daughter had been speaking since birth. Pittsburgh Sign Language Center offered private tutoring, intensive courses designed for parents of deaf children. Basic conversational fluency required 6 to 8 months of dedicated study. The cost was $150 per hour, a figure that would have seemed ridiculous if Victoria wasn't already calculating how many hours she'd need, how many thousands of dollars it would take to fix what she'd broken through neglect. Her cursor hovered over the enrollment button. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd figure it out tomorrow. She had a board meeting on Monday, quarterly reports due Wednesday. The Thornton merger required her full attention if she wanted to maintain control of the company she'd built from her husband's life insurance and her own relentless ambition. Victoria closed the laptop without enrolling, but Daniel's words wouldn't leave her alone. How much longer are you planning to wait? The question sat in her chest like a stone, like an accusation, like a truth she'd been avoiding for 7 years. Rachel's father didn't have time. He thought he did. Eventually, you run out of time entirely. The wine glass sat full and forgotten while Victoria stood in her kitchen at 11 p.m. on a Friday night, surrounded by the evidence of her success in the wreckage of her failure. 34 years old, CEO of a company worth $60 million, mother to a daughter who was sitting alone somewhere upstairs, probably drawing more pictures of the distance Victoria had created and couldn't figure how to cross. She went to Emma's room, opened the door quietly in case the girl was sleeping. Emma was awake, sitting at her desk with a notebook open, pencil moving in the specific concentration of creation. Victoria watched from the doorway, this child she'd carried and birthed and failed in every way that mattered beyond provision of material necessities. Emma looked up, felt her mother's presence through the shift in air, or light, or whatever senses deaf children develop to compensate for the one that was missing. She held up her notebook, showed Victoria the new drawing. 3 stick figures this time, 2 on one side with hands raised, clearly signing to each other, 1 on the other side, hands empty and alone. The tall figure with hands raised was labeled in careful print, "The man who could hear me." The small figure signing back, "Emma." The figure alone on the other side, "Mom." Victoria's heart cracked clean through. She tried to sign something, anything, but her hands betrayed her with their incompetence. Emma watched her mother fumble, and the resignation in her 7-year-old eyes was worse than anger would have been. Resignation meant Emma had given up expecting anything different. Resignation meant the gap had become permanent in Emma's mind, a fixed feature of their relationship rather than a problem that might be solved. Emma turned back to her drawing without waiting for Victoria to figure out what she'd been trying to say. Conversation over, message received. Mom was on the other side of the line, and no amount of wanting to cross it would make her capable of crossing it. Victoria backed out of the room, closed the door, walked to her own bedroom on legs that felt unsteady. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, still in the silver dress she'd worn to impress investors, still wearing the mask of competence she showed the world. The mask felt heavy now. The dress felt like costume jewelry, pretty and worthless. She opened her laptop again. Pittsburgh Sign Language Center's enrollment page loaded with the patient indifference of a website that didn't care whether she clicked, submit, or close the tab. Emergency intensive course, parent of deaf child. The form required basic information: name, contact information, daughter's age and hearing status, current ASL knowledge level. Victoria filled it out with shaking hands. Credit card information, $3,000 for the initial course package, 4 sessions per week, intensive instruction with one of their most demanding teachers. The price was nothing. The time commitment was terrifying. 4 sessions meant 4 evenings when she wouldn't be in the office, wouldn't be available for emergencies, wouldn't be demonstrating to Robert Thornton that she could handle a $60 million company and a child simultaneously. Her cursor hovered over submit. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow, when her head was clearer, when panic wasn't making decisions, when she could approach this logically instead of emotionally. But Daniel's voice echoed. Rachel's father thought he had time. Victoria pressed submit before she could talk herself out of it again. The confirmation email arrived 3 seconds later. Welcome to Pittsburgh Sign Language Center. Your instructor is Sarah Chen. First session, Monday, 6 p.m. Victoria closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of her penthouse settling around her. Somewhere down the hall, Emma was probably still awake, probably still drawing pictures of the distance between them. Tomorrow, Victoria would tell her about the classes, would try to explain that things were going to change, would attempt to communicate hope through the barrier of her own incompetence. Tonight, she just sat in the dark and let herself feel the full weight of 7 years of choices that had led her to this moment. 7 years of telling herself that Emma had everything she needed. 7 years of confusing provision with presence. 7 years of being a mother in name only, while a stranger in a work uniform became the first person to actually see her daughter. The city outside her windows glowed with light pollution that made stars invisible. Victoria thought about Daniel Carter, HVAC technician who made maybe $50,000 a year and volunteered his Saturdays to teach sign language to strangers. Thought about the way he'd crouched beside Emma with his knees on marble that would wrinkle his pants. Thought about the absolute certainty in his voice when he'd said she still had time. But Rachel's father didn't. She still had time. The question was whether she'd keep wasting it on excuses or whether she'd finally do the work required to cross the distance Emma had mapped so clearly in her drawings. The thick black line was still there. It would probably always be there in some form, evidence of the years they'd lost. But maybe if Victoria worked hard enough, learned fast enough, showed up consistently enough, they could build a bridge across it. Maybe that stranger in the work uniform had just given her the blueprint for how to save what was left of her relationship with her daughter. Maybe his grief over the sister he'd lost could prevent Victoria from losing the daughter she still had. Maybe it wasn't too late, even though 7 years felt like an eternity when measured in a child's understanding of time. Victoria lay back on her bed, still fully dressed, and watched shadows move across her ceiling while exhaustion pulled her towards sleep. Monday, she would start learning her daughter's language. Tomorrow, she would try to explain to Emma that things were going to be different. Tonight, she would lie here and let herself feel everything she'd been avoiding for 7 years. All the guilt and shame and desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the mother Emma deserved. Across the city, Daniel Carter slept fitfully, dreaming of sisters and daughters and the weight of words left unspoken. His hands moved in his sleep, signing apologies to ghosts who couldn't answer, signing promises to little girls who deserved better than what they'd been given. In the morning, he would wake up and make Tyler breakfast and drive to work and fix other people's broken systems, because that's what he did, what he'd always done, what he knew how to do. But tonight, in the space between Friday and Saturday, between confrontation and consequence, two people lay awake in separate parts of Pittsburgh and thought about the same little girl sitting alone at a table while the world moved around her. Thought about the thick black line in her drawing. Thought about whether time and effort and dedication could build bridges across distances that seemed insurmountable. Thought about whether it was possible to fix what you didn't understand, and whether understanding could be learned when you were already 7 years behind. The city settled into its weekend rhythm while these questions hung unanswered in the dark, waiting for Monday morning when choices would have to become actions, when intentions would have to become efforts, when two strangers who'd collided over a child's loneliness would have to decide whether their collision would change anything at all. Saturday morning arrived with Tyler's internal alarm clock, which operated independently of actual time zones or parental needs for sleep. Daniel felt the mattress shift as 8-year-old knees landed somewhere near his ribs, heard the breath before speech that meant questions were coming. Dad, we're still going to the library, right? Even without Emma? Daniel opened one eye, found Tyler's face 3 inches from his own, earnest and hopeful in the way that made refusing him physically painful. Yeah, buddy, we go every Saturday. That doesn't change. What if she shows up? What if her mom brings her? Daniel sat up slowly, pulled Tyler into the kind of hug that was meant to ground both of them. Don't get your hopes up, Ty. Rich people don't usually come to public libraries on Saturday mornings, but they could. The certainty in Tyler's voice was the specific optimism of children who hadn't learned yet that wanting something wasn't enough to make it real. Daniel kissed the top of his son's head and didn't explain that Victoria Morgan probably had a dozen better options for her weekend, that charity galas and ASL classes were worlds apart, that the confrontation at the Grand View Hotel had likely ended any possibility of connection. East Liberty Library opened at 9:30, but Daniel and Tyler arrived at 9:15 because parking got scarce once the weekend crowds hit. The building sat solid and unpretentious on Station Street, red brick and large windows in the democratic promise that knowledge belonged to everyone, regardless of zip code. Tyler bounced through the entrance with his dinosaur backpack, while Daniel carried the canvas bag that held his teaching materials. The children's section smelled like old books and possibility. 3 families were already waiting, faces that Daniel recognized from previous weeks. The Johnsons, with their infant daughter who'd been born profoundly deaf 6 months ago. The Martinez family, whose grandmother had moved in and needed the household to adapt to her deafness. A single mother named Jennifer, whose 5-year-old son had lost his hearing to meningitis and was still adjusting to a world without sound. Daniel set up his materials on the low table while Tyler helped the younger kids find seats. This was their routine. Had been for 3 years since Daniel first walked into this library and asked if they needed volunteer ASL instructors. The librarian had looked at his work clothes and calloused hands and asked what qualified him. He told her about Rachel, and she'd given him Saturdays from 10 to noon for as long as he wanted them. The class started with alphabet review, always, because finger spelling was foundation. Daniel's hands moved through the letters while parents mimicked with varying degrees of success. A was easy, fist with thumb to the side. B was trickier, fingers together and thumb across palm. By the time they reached G and Q, frustration was visible on adult faces. Don't worry about perfection, worry about being understood. ASL isn't about getting every hand shape exactly right. It's about communication, connection. Your kids aren't grading you on technique. They just want you to treat. And Mrs. Johnson's hands were shaking as she attempted M for the 7th time. This is so hard. How did you learn this so fast? Daniel thought about being 8 years old, watching his mother's hands shape words for his baby sister, while their father pretended the whole situation was temporary. I learned because someone I loved needed me to learn. That's the best motivation there is. They moved through 20 basic signs that would cover daily needs. Eat, drink, sleep, help, thank you, please, sorry love. Daniel demonstrated each one with exaggerated clarity, broke down the movements into component parts, corrected hand positions with patient repetition. Tyler circulated among the kids, showing them how to sign dinosaur names and turning grammar into games. The Martinez grandmother watched with eyes that held cautious hope. Her granddaughter signed something to Daniel, fluid and confident, years of practice evident. She wants to know if you think her family will really learn this time. Daniel signed directly to the grandmother. They're here every week. That counts for something. Give them time. By 11:30, the families were packing up and promising to practice. Jennifer lingered with her son, who was showing Tyler a picture he'd drawn of a T-Rex. Thank you for doing this. The classes downtown want $200 per session. I can't afford that on my salary. Daniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest that came from knowing how many people were priced out of basic communication with their own children. Nobody should have to pay to talk to their kid. This is free, always will be. After they left, Tyler and Daniel claimed their usual spot in the nonfiction section, where dinosaur encyclopedias lived next to astronomy guides. Tyler sprawled on the floor with a book about paleontology, while Daniel pretended to read about HVAC system innovations and actually thought about a little girl in navy velvet who'd looked at him like he was the first real thing she'd seen in years. Dad, do you think that girl Emma will ever come here? Daniel closed his book, gave Tyler the honest answer instead of the comfortable one. I don't know, buddy. Tyler's expression shifted into something that looked too perceptive for 8 years old. I hope she does. She seemed really lonely, like she needs a friend. Daniel pulled his son closer, felt pride and grief mixing in his chest. You've got a good heart, Ty. I learned from you. The words sat warm and heavy, responsibility and legacy all tangled together. Daniel thought about what he was teaching his son through actions more than words. That working class didn't mean worthless. That helping people mattered more than profit margins. That sometimes standing up for a kid you'd never met again was the right choice, even when it cost you something. Monday evening found Victoria in her office until the last possible minute, delaying the inevitable. Her assistant had blocked 6 p.m. on her calendar with the kind of impenetrable formatting that meant no negotiations. The Pittsburgh Sign Language Center occupied a modest building in Oakland, sandwiched between a coffee shop and a physical therapy clinic. Victoria arrived 17 minutes late because a conference call had run over and traffic had been worse than predicted. The receptionist looked up with practiced neutrality, the expression of someone who'd seen every excuse for tardiness and found none of them compelling. Victoria Morgan? Sarah is waiting in room 3. The classroom was small and fluorescent bright, walls covered in ASL alphabet posters and photographs of deaf cultural icons. A woman sat at the front table, 40-something with sharp eyes that tracked Victoria's entrance with clinical assessment. She didn't stand, didn't smile, didn't offer the social lubrication that smoothed most of Victoria's professional interactions. "You're late." Victoria had prepared an explanation about the conference call and traffic, but something in Sarah Chen's expression suggested explanations wouldn't be welcome. "I apologize. It won't happen again." "It will, but each time, you'll need to decide, is this business call more important than Emma?" The words acted like a physical blow, perfectly aimed at the guilt Victoria had been carrying for 7 years. She sat down across from Sarah and understood immediately that this woman wasn't going to coddle her, wasn't impressed by CEO status or net worth, wasn't interested in anything except whether Victoria was serious about learning her daughter's language. "Why are you here?" Victoria had prepared an answer for this too, something about communication and connection and being a better mother. "To learn to communicate with my daughter." Wrong. The word hung in the fluorescent air, absolute and uncompromising. "You're here to learn a language, not a tool, not a party trick, not a way to fix your guilt. ASL isn't English on your hands. It's a completely different language with its own grammar, syntax, culture, history." Sarah's hands moved while she spoke, demonstrating the fluidity that Victoria's hands would probably never achieve. Deaf people aren't broken hearing people waiting to be repaired. They're a linguistic minority with their own identity, their own community, their own way of experiencing the world. You don't learn ASL to make Emma like you. You learn it to enter her world on her terms. Victoria felt her spine straightening, the defensive posture she adopted in boardrooms when people questioned her competence. "I understand that. I'm here because I want to be part of Emma's world." "Then prove it. Why are you here?" Victoria took a breath, tried again. "I'm here to learn my daughter's language so I can be part of her world." Sarah nodded once, satisfaction microscopic. "Better. Now we start." The alphabet took 40 minutes, 26 letters that Victoria had learned in kindergarten, but these letters existed in 3 dimensions, with hand positions and orientations that her fingers fumbled. G and Q looked identical until Sarah demonstrated thumb placement with exaggerated patience. M and N required remembering how many fingers covered the thumb. R and U depended on which fingers crossed. Again. Victoria repeated G for the 15th time, felt her thumb cramp from holding the position. Wrong, thumb needs to come forward more. Again. By the time they reached Z, Victoria's hands were aching and her pride was somewhere near her shoes. She'd negotiated million-dollar contracts and supervised teams of engineers and given presentations to investors who could make or break her company with a single decision. None of it had prepared her for the humiliation of being unable to shape her own hands into 26 basic positions. The second hour covered 20 signs that Sarah deemed essential. "Hello, goodbye. Thank you, please. Mom, daughter, love, sorry. Eat, drink, sleep, help. Book, school, friend, happy." Each sign had to be performed correctly 3 times before Sarah allowed progression to the next one. Victoria tried to sign "I love you, Emma," and produced something that made Sarah's eyebrows rise. "You just told me you love Emma's book." Again. The clock showed 7:45 when Sarah finally called time. Victoria's head was spinning with hand shapes and movement patterns and grammatical structures that bore no relation to anything she'd learned in 12 years of formal education. Homework. Practice alphabet 100 times before Wednesday. Memorize these 50 signs. Sarah handed over flashcards that looked deceptively simple, photographs of hand positions with English translations on the back. Watch 2 hours of ASL videos. No subtitles, pure immersion. You won't understand much, but your brain needs to start processing visual language patterns. Victoria checked her calendar mentally. Wednesday was 2 days away. She had budget meetings and product reviews and the Thornton merger materials to review. I thought this was twice a week. You said emergency intensive. I took you seriously. 4 classes per week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday morning, plus 10 hours minimum self-study. You want to have basic conversations with Emma by summer? This is what it takes. Victoria felt panic rising. The specific overwhelm that came from realizing she'd committed to something that would consume time she'd already allocated elsewhere. I'm not sure I can. Then leave now and stop wasting both our time. The words were brutal, clinical, exactly what Victoria needed to hear. But if you stay, understand this. Giving up on learning Emma's language would be giving up on Emma. And that little girl has been given up on enough already. Victoria drove home with cramping hands and a head full of hand shapes that kept sliding away when she tried to recall them. The penthouse felt emptier than usual, all glass and expensive furniture and no warmth. Emma was in her room, probably reading or drawing or existing in the solitary world she'd learned to navigate. Victoria knocked, waited for the visual cue that Emma had noticed, entered when her daughter looked up from her book. Her hands moved through the clumsy shapes Sarah had drilled. I start class, learn your language. Emma's eyes widened, hope and skepticism fighting for dominance. Really? Really? Take time. I learn slow, but I try. Emma's face transformed in the ways that made Victoria's chest hurt. Joy and relief and something that looked disturbingly like gratitude that her mother was finally doing the bare minimum required. They sat together while Victoria attempted to explain about Sarah and the intensive course and how things were going to be different now. Most of her signing was wrong, and Emma corrected with the patient gentleness of someone who'd learned not to expect too much. But they were communicating, however imperfectly, and that was something. Wednesday morning brought an email that made Victoria's coffee taste like ash. From Rodriguez at Riverside Academy .edu. Subject, Emma's request. Mrs. Morgan, Emma has asked me to facilitate contact with Daniel Carter on her behalf. Mr. Carter volunteers with our ASL program and has been thoroughly vetted. Emma would like to email him questions about books and sign language. Given Mr. Carter's reputation in our community and Emma's obvious enthusiasm, I'm inclined to approve this with your permission. All emails would route through me first for monitoring. Please let me know your decision. Lisa Rodriguez, ASL coordinator. Victoria read the email 3 times, feeling emotions she couldn't quite name. Relief that someone trusted could facilitate this. Jealousy that Emma wanted to talk to Daniel more than her own mother. Gratitude that he'd apparently meant his offer to be available. Fear that she was outsourcing her parenting to a stranger. She approved the request because refusing would have been about her pride instead of Emma's needs. That evening, while Victoria practiced alphabet shapes until her fingers cramped, Emma composed her first email with Ms. Rodriguez's supervision. Mr. Carter, my name is Emma Morgan. I'm the girl you met at the hotel, my school counselor. Rodriguez said you volunteer teaching sign language and that it's okay to email you with questions about ASL. I wanted to say thank you for talking to me at the party. You're the first person besides my teachers who ever signed to me. It made me feel like I matter. I have a question. Why do some hearing people learn sign language and some don't? My mom is trying now, I think, but it seems really hard for her. Does that mean she doesn't care enough? Also, Tyler sounds really nice. Does he really like dinosaurs? I like astronomy and time travel books. Thank you. Emma Daniels' phone buzzed while he was elbow deep in a commercial refrigeration unit that had decided to quit during the dinner rush. He wiped his hands on his work pants and read the email, felt something in his chest tighten and release simultaneously. Mark leaned over his shoulder, read without permission in the way that long friendship allowed. That's the girl from the hotel. You gonna answer? Daniel thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the boundaries he should probably maintain, all the reasonable arguments for staying uninvolved. Yeah, I'm gonna answer. He waited until he was home, Tyler fed and homework supervised, before sitting down to compose a response that wouldn't overstep while also wouldn't leave a lonely 8-year-old hanging. Emma, thank you for your email. Ms. Rodriguez is right. You can always email with ASL questions. To answer your question, learning a new language is hard for everyone, especially adults. It doesn't mean they don't care. Sometimes people who care the most struggle the hardest because they're scared of making mistakes. Your mom trying to learn now shows she cares. Give her time and patience. Adults need encouragement just like kids do. Tyler says pterodactyls aren't dinosaurs. They're flying reptiles. And he wants to know if you know that. He's 8 and loves being right about dinosaurs. Keep being brave, Yuma. You matter very much. Daniel Carter, P.S. Tyler and I go to East Liberty Library every Saturday morning around 10 a.m. We're there for my volunteer teaching, but afterwards we usually read books and talk about dinosaurs. You and your mom would be welcome to join us if she agrees. He hit send before he could second-guess the invitation, before caution could override the memory of Emma's face when someone finally spoke her language. Tyler appeared at his elbow within seconds. Did you just invite Emma to the library? Dad, this is awesome. Daniel pulled his son into a hug that was partly affection and partly uncertainty. Don't get too excited. Her mom's very busy. They might not, but you invited them. That means they could come. Daniel thought about Victoria's ice-cold expression, her expensive clothes, the world she inhabited that had no overlap with his. Yeah, Ty, they could. Victoria read the email exchange Thursday morning, felt the complicated stew of emotions that came from watching her daughter reach out to a stranger for the guidance she should be getting from her mother. But Daniel's response was thoughtful and appropriate, and his invitation to the library felt like an extension of the offer he'd made at the gala, rather than overstepping. She found Emma at breakfast, attempted signs that were still clumsy, but improving. Man, Daniel, invite library Saturday. You want go? Emma's face transformed into pure joy, the kind of unguarded happiness Victoria hadn't seen in months or possibly years. Really? Can we, please? The enthusiasm was answer enough. I come too, okay? Emma threw her arms around Victoria's waist, the first spontaneous physical affection in recent memory. Yes, thank you, Mom. Victoria held her daughter and wondered when she'd become someone Emma had to thank for basic acts of parenting, when showing up had become noteworthy instead of expected. Saturday arrived with Victoria's nerves stretched tighter than they'd been before investor presentations. She changed clothes 3 times, trying to find the balance between her usual professional polish and appropriate casualness for a public library. Emma wore jeans and a purple sweater, comfortable and young in ways that made Victoria's chest hurt. The drive to East Liberty took 23 minutes through weekend traffic that was lighter than weekday chaos. Victoria parked in the public lot and felt the surreal displacement of entering a space she'd never been, would never normally visit, with a daughter she was just learning to communicate with. Daniel and Tyler were near the children's section, Tyler bouncing with barely contained energy while Daniel organized materials at a low table. He looked different in the weekend clothes, jeans, and a faded Steelers sweatshirt that had seen better years. More relaxed, less guarded, human instead of confrontational stranger. Tyler spotted Emma first, launched himself across the children's section with the kind of enthusiasm that ignored social conventions. Emma, you came! His hands moved while he spoke, natural bilingualism that made Victoria's laborious learning feel even more inadequate. Emma signed back with the fluid confidence of her first language, face lit with genuine pleasure. Hi, I like astronomy. And yes, I know pterodactyls aren't dinosaurs. Tyler's face split into delighted recognition. Dad, she knows we're going to be best friends. Both children disappeared into the stacks immediately, leaving 2 adults standing in awkward proximity near a table of teaching materials. Daniel recovered first, extended a hand that was calloused and competent. Thank you for coming. Emma seems excited. Victoria shook his hand, felt the contrast between his work-roughened grip and the soft hands of executives she usually dealt with. Thank you for inviting us. Emma was very excited. The silence stretched for 3 seconds before Victoria forced herself to continue. I owe you an apology. At the gala, you were harsh, but you weren't wrong. Daniel's expression shifted into something that might have been surprise. I was harsh. I shouldn't have... No, Victoria interrupted with the decisiveness that served her in boardrooms. I needed to hear it. I've been failing Emma for 7 years. Someone had to say it. She held up her hands, red and slightly swollen from a week of intensive practice. I'm taking ASL classes now, 4 times a week. It's harder than running a company. Daniel's face registered something between respect and recognition. Sarah Chen? The question startled Victoria into honest surprise. You know her? She taught me advanced ASL when I was 16. After Rachel died, Sarah's tough, but she's the best. If you stick with it, she'll get you fluent. Victoria felt something ease slightly in her chest, the reassurance of shared experience. I'm going to stick with it. I don't have a choice. The pause held weight, unspoken acknowledgement of what failure would mean. Can I ask about Rachel, your sister? Daniel gestured toward the coffee station in the corner, the universal signal for conversations that required sitting. They settled at a table with bad coffee and paper cups, positioned where they could see their children through the stacks. Rachel was born deaf. My parents reacted differently. Daniel's hands wrapped around his coffee cup, knuckles white with remembered tension. Mom immediately started learning ASL, took classes, joined deaf community, embraced it. Dad refused, said Rachel could be fixed with cochlear implants, speech therapy, making her normal. He spent years chasing treatments, spending money we didn't have, refusing to accept Rachel as she was. Victoria watched his face, saw grief that was 10 years old but still sharp. I was 5 when Rachel was born. By the time I was 8, I was fluent in ASL because Mom taught me. I could talk to my sister. Dad couldn't. Rachel grew up knowing our father was ashamed of her, that he saw her deafness as something wrong that needed fixing. She was 10 when she got bacterial meningitis, came on fast, healthy to ICU in 36 hours. Daniel's voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through with the determination of someone who'd told this story before and knew getting through it was the only option. Final day, machines beeping, Mom and Dad on either side of her hospital bed. Rachel's eyes opened. She was trying to communicate. Her hands moved weakly. She was signing something to Dad. Dad was holding her hand, crying, telling her to fight, that he loved her. But he couldn't understand what she was signing. He'd spent 10 years refusing to learn. I was standing there, 15 years old, watching my sister try to tell our father something in her last moments. I think she was signing, I love you, Daddy, and I forgive you. But her hands were so weak, the sign so shaky, I'll never know for sure. The silence that followed held the weight of permanent loss, of time that couldn't be recovered, of words that would remain forever unheard. She died 20 minutes later. Dad broke, completely. Quit his job, started drinking, blamed himself every day. 3 years later, heart attack at 48. Doctor said cardiovascular disease. I think grief killed him. The weight of knowing he'd missed 10 years of knowing his daughter because he was too proud to learn her language. Victoria felt tears on her face, didn't bother wiping them away. So when I saw you at that gala, rich, powerful, successful CEO, and your daughter sitting alone because you hadn't learned ASL, I saw my father, and I couldn't watch it happen again. That's why I was harsh. Not because I enjoy judging people, because I know exactly how this story ends if you don't change it. Victoria's throat was too tight for speech, so she signed with her improving hands. I'm changing it, I promise you. Daniel's expression softened into something that might have been belief. The fact that you're here, that you're trying, that's huge, that's everything. The children returned with stacks of books that threatened to topple, faces flushed with the specific joy of finding kindred spirits. Emma signed rapidly to Daniel, too fast for Victoria to follow, but the excitement was clear even without translation. Daniel signed back with patient attention, then looked at Victoria. She wants to know if Tyler can come over next week. Victoria's first instinct was refusal. Her penthouse wasn't child-proofed. Her schedule didn't accommodate play dates. Hosting would require planning she hadn't done. But Daniel's words echoed, the fact that you're trying is everything. Yes, next Saturday. Emma's face transformed into joy so pure, Victoria felt her earlier hesitations dissolve. This was worth schedule disruption. This was worth stepping outside her carefully controlled routines. This was what changing looked like in practice instead of theory. They checked out books under the patient watch of the librarian who'd seen this scene play out dozens of times before. Outside in April sunshine that held the promise of real spring, Tyler and Emma were already planning their next meeting in sign language that flew too fast for Victoria to catch more than fragments. We do this every Saturday. You and Emma are welcome anytime. Daniel's voice held genuine invitation, not social obligation. I'd like that. Victoria surprised herself with the honesty. She did want this. Wanted Saturdays that included connection instead of isolation. Wanted Emma to have friendships with kids who spoke her language. Wanted the tentative bridge they were building to become something solid. A moment later, there were arms around Victoria's waist in the parking lot. Joy and gratitude and hope all tangled together. Thank you for bringing me. Tyler's so nice. And Daniel answers my questions. Victoria held her daughter and ignored the small sting that came from Emma needing to thank her for basic parenting. From knowing that a stranger had become her daughter's primary source of understanding. The weeks accumulated like compound interest. 4 ASL classes per week with Sarah, who remained demanding and unimpressed by anything except measurable progress. 8 Saturday mornings at the library where Tyler and Emma bonded over books, while Daniel and Victoria bonded over coffee and the shared understanding of raising children alone. Victoria's company moved forward with the Thornton merger, negotiations progressing through May and into June. Robert Thornton remained cautiously optimistic, but insisted on quarterly evidence that Victoria could sustain her claimed work-life balance. The test arrived via formal invitation in early June. Mrs. Morgan, I would like to meet your daughter. June 15th, 6 p.m., my home in Fox Chapel. Small dinner, immediate family only. Consider this evaluation of whether the merger partnership will be sustainable long-term. Regards, Robert Thornton. Victoria showed Daniel the invitation during their Saturday coffee, while the kids discussed something about lunar phases and the kind of animated signing that made language barriers seem absurd. He's testing me, wants to see me parent in a professional setting. Daniel read the email with the careful attention of someone who understood stakes even when they weren't his own. So show him. Bring Emma. Let her be herself. What if I mess up? What if I can't interpret quickly enough? Then you ask Emma to repeat. You're not perfect yet. Nobody expects you to be. The words settled something in Victoria's chest. Not perfect yet, but trying, but showing up, but different than she'd been 4 months ago. June 15th arrived with Victoria's nerves wound tight. Emma wore a green dress that was elegant without being formal, age-appropriate, and beautiful. They drove to Fox Chapel in comfortable silence, Emma reading in the back seat while Victoria rehearsed signs in her head. Thornton's mansion was exactly what Victoria expected. Old money, tasteful restraint, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. His granddaughter Lily answered the door with shy politeness, 8 years old and curious about the deaf girl her grandfather had mentioned. Emma, this is Lily. Emma's hands moved in greeting, and Lily looked to Victoria for translation. Emma says hello, and she's happy to meet you. Lily's face brightened with interest. Can you teach me some signs? Emma's eyes went wide with pleased surprise, and for the next 20 minutes, the two girls sat in Thornton's study while Emma taught basic signs. Hello, friend. Pretty. Fun. Lily absorbed them with the easy fluency of childhood, giggling when she got hand positions wrong, earnest in her attempts to communicate. Thornton watched from the doorway with an expression Victoria couldn't quite read. Your daughter has patience I didn't expect from an 8-year-old. She's had to be patient. Most people don't try to learn her language. The dinner was small, immediate family only as promised. Thornton's wife, their daughter and son-in-law, Lily and Emma. The conversation flowed around topics Victoria could navigate. Business trends, Pittsburgh development, charitable foundations. But she kept one eye on Emma, signing translations when necessary, including her daughter in discussions that would have excluded her months ago. Emma told Thornton about her astronomy interests using a combination of signs and Victoria's voice translation. Thornton listened with genuine engagement, asked questions that weren't patronizing, treated Emma like a person instead of a curiosity. After dinner, while the adults lingered over coffee and the girls played upstairs, Thornton pulled Victoria aside. I see changes in you. 3 months ago at that gala, you looked distressed, scattered. Tonight you look grounded. Emma seems happy. I'm trying, still figuring it out. Keep trying, that's all we can do as parents. The drive home felt lighter somehow. Emma signing excitedly about Lily and whether they could be friends too. Victoria realized she'd passed Thornton's test without even recognizing the moment of evaluation. The merger would proceed, her company was secure, and more importantly, Emma had experienced an evening where inclusion was assumed rather than negotiated. July arrived with heat that made Pittsburgh's humidity feel tropical. Daniel was 3 service calls deep into a Thursday when his boss summoned him to the office with the kind of neutral tone that could mean anything. "Daniel, you're one of our best techs. Corporate wants you for regional training director position. Cleveland office." The words had landed like a physical blow, opportunity and loss packaged together. Salary goes from 52 to 75,000. Better benefits, pension, real career path. But it's Cleveland. You'd start September 1st. Decision deadline is August 15th. Daniel drove home in a fog, numbers and implications spinning through his head. $23,000 raise was life-changing money. Better insurance meant Tyler's dental work wouldn't strain the budget. Pension meant actual retirement planning instead of hoping he could work until 70. But Cleveland was 2 hours from Pittsburgh, from Tyler's school, from Emma, who'd become his son's best friend, from Saturday library mornings that had become the highlight of Daniel's week, from Victoria, who'd become something Daniel was carefully not examining too closely. Tyler took the news exactly as Daniel feared. "We have to move?" "But Emma, Dad, Emma's my best friend." The anguish in his voice was real, immediate, 8-year-old understanding that distance destroyed relationships. "I know, buddy, but this job, it's good for us. I don't care about the job. I care about Emma. Cleveland's only 2 hours away. We can visit." Tyler's face crumpled into tears that made Daniel's chest hurt. "It's not the same. And what about Mrs. Morgan? Don't you like her?" The question caught Daniel off guard, exposed feelings he'd been trying to ignore. "Ty, we're just..." "Dad, I'm 8, not stupid. You smile different when she's around, like you used to smile at Mom." Daniel pulled his son close, felt the weight of choices that would affect both of them. "It's complicated, Ty. It's not complicated. You like her. She likes you. Emma and I want to be siblings. Why are we leaving?" The question sat in Daniel's chest like a stone, unanswerable and heavy, because practical mattered more than emotional, because promotions didn't come often in his line of work, because the class difference between HVAC technician and CEO was real, even if they were pretending it didn't exist, because he was terrified that staying would mean eventually watching Victoria realize he wasn't enough. That Saturday at the library, Daniel told Victoria about the job offer with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't. Cleveland, training director, significant raise. "I'd start September 1st if I accept." Victoria's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips, expressions cycling through surprise and something that looked like pain. "Cleveland," the word hung between them, geography and implication. "That's 2 hours away." Daniel nodded, couldn't quite meet her eyes. "It's the smart decision. Better for Tyler long term." "Is it?" Victoria's voice was carefully controlled, the CEO mask sliding into place. "Tyler doesn't want to leave Emma, and honestly, I don't want you to leave either." The admission hung in the air between them, more than friendship, less than confession. "Victoria, Emma would be heartbroken. She just got Tyler as a friend. And I value what we've built here." Daniel forced himself to ask the question that had been sitting in his chest for weeks. "What have we built?" Victoria's hands twisted around her coffee cup, knuckles white. "Friendship. Support. Something I don't want to lose. Is that all it is? Friendship?" The silence stretched for 5 seconds before Victoria answered with careful honesty. "I don't know. Maybe it could be more. But you're moving to Cleveland, so does it matter? I haven't decided yet. But you're leaning toward going." Victoria's voice held accusation now, anger breaking through control. "It's practical. It's smart career move. Is that what you told yourself? That practical matters more than whatever this is?" Daniel's defenses rose with the particular defensiveness of someone who knew he was being called out. "I'm a single dad making $52,000 a year. You're a CEO worth millions. You think I don't know that gap exists? I can't take you to fancy restaurants. I can't afford vacations to Europe. I live in a 900 square foot house in Lawrenceville. Eventually you'll realize I can't give you the life you're used to." Victoria stood up, coffee forgotten, anger visible now. Did I ever ask for any of that? Daniel stood too, matching her intensity. No, but you don't have to ask. It's obvious we're from different worlds. So you're running to Cleveland rather than find out if those worlds can meet. I'm taking a promotion that's good for my family. Fine, take it. Victoria's voice was ice and hurt. But don't pretend it's about Tyler. He wants to stay. This is about you being scared. She walked away before Daniel could formulate a response, crossed the library toward where Emma and Tyler were reading, oblivious to adult complications. Daniel watched her go and felt a specific ache of knowing she was right. That fear was driving his decision more than logic. That running to Cleveland was easier than staying and risking his heart on a relationship that logic said couldn't work. Mark called that evening while Daniel was pretending to watch television and actually replaying the library conversation in his head. I heard about Cleveland. You gonna take it? Daniel stared at the television without seeing it. It's a good opportunity. That's not what I asked. I don't know yet. Mark's sigh came through the phone, heavy with exasperation. What are you so afraid of? I'm not afraid. Bullshit. You're terrified she'll realize you're not enough. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone, anger rising because truth always hurt. Maybe because I'm not. Look at her life, Mark. Look at mine. I am looking. I see a good man who works hard, raises a great kid, volunteers his time to help others. I see a man any woman would be lucky to have. The question is, do you see that? Or do you only see HVAC tech not good enough for CEO? The silence on Daniel's end was answer enough. You know what your problem is? You think your value is in your paycheck. But the people who matter, Tyler, Emma, Victoria, they value you for who you are, not what you make. Your father taught you to feel ashamed of being working class, but there's no shame in honest work. There's no shame in being the guy who keeps buildings running, who teaches kids to communicate, who shows up every day. Mark's voice softened slightly. Stop letting a dead man's regrets dictate your choices. The call ended, but the words lingered. Daniel sat in the dark of his living room and thought about his father, who died thinking manual labor was failure, who'd spent his life chasing respectability that always stayed just out of reach. Daniel had inherited that shame without realizing it, internalized the belief that working with his hands instead of his mind meant something less than. But Tyler didn't see it that way. Emma didn't see it that way. And maybe, just maybe, Victoria didn't either. The decision deadline was August 15th, 2 weeks away. Daniel had 2 weeks to choose between the practical path that led to Cleveland and financial security, or the terrifying path that meant staying in Pittsburgh and finding out whether class differences mattered less than connection. 2 weeks to decide whether his father's voice or his son's voice would be louder. 2 weeks to figure out whether running was safer than standing still. August arrived with the specific tension that comes from unresolved conflicts and looming deadlines. Daniel went to work, came home, helped Tyler with summer reading assignments, and carefully avoided the library on Saturdays. Tyler asked about Emma every day with the persistence of someone who didn't understand why adults couldn't just fix things by deciding to fix them. Why can't we go to the library? Because sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. Did you and Mrs. Morgan have a fight? Yeah, buddy, we did. About Cleveland, Tyler's ability to cut through complexity to core issues was both blessing and curse. About a lot of things, about what matters and what doesn't, about whether staying or leaving is the right choice. I think staying is right. Tyler's voice held the absolute certainty of 8 years old, before life taught you that wanting something wasn't enough to make it true. I know you do, but it's not that simple. Except maybe it was. Maybe Daniel was the one making it complicated, adding layers of doubt and fear and class consciousness to a situation that could be simpler if he let it. Mark had been right about that much. Daniel carried his father's shame like inherited debt, paying interest on guilt that had never been his to begin with. The days bled together into routine that felt hollow. Emergency calls and repairs and coming home to an empty house except for Tyler. The decision deadline crept closer with the inevitability of time that couldn't be negotiated or delayed. August 15th loomed on the calendar, circled in red, demanding resolution. Victoria spent August buried in work, the familiar escape that had served her for years before Emma and Daniel had forced her to acknowledge what she was avoiding. The Thornton merger consumed days with due diligence, and nights with contract review. Her ASL classes continued with Sarah's uncompromising demands, but the joy had leaked out somewhere around the library fight. Emma asked about Tyler with the same daily persistence Daniel faced, but Victoria's answers were vaguer, less certain. When can I see Tyler again? Soon, sweetheart. The adults are figuring some things out. What things? Complicated things. About bars and where people live and how relationships work. Emma's expression shifted into something that looked too mature for 8 years old. The specific wisdom of children who'd learned early that adults complicated simple things. You like Daniel. He likes you. Why is that complicated? Because liking someone isn't always enough. But Victoria wasn't sure she believed her own answer anymore. Maybe liking someone, loving someone, if she was honest, was exactly enough if both people were brave enough to choose it over practical considerations and fear. The call came on August 10th at 2 in the afternoon while Victoria was in a budget meeting that would determine third quarter projections. Her phone buzzed with the specific pattern she'd set for Emma's school, the emergency sequence that bypassed do not disturb settings. Mrs. Morgan, Emma collapsed during outdoor activities. We've called an ambulance. She's conscious, but not responsive to staff attempts at communication. Victoria's world narrowed to tunnel vision and ringing ears. She was moving before conscious thought engaged, grabbing her purse and keys, interrupting the CFO mid-sentence with apologies she'd sort out later. The drive to Children's Hospital took 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. Victoria's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, mind cycling through worst-case scenarios with the efficiency of someone whose husband had died suddenly and who knew that security was an illusion people told themselves to sleep at night. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and anxiety. A nurse directed Victoria to Base 7, where Emma lay on a gurney with oxygen mask fogging around her small face. IVs snaked into her arm, monitors beeped with steady rhythm that should have been reassuring but just reminded Victoria how fragile life was, how quickly things could change. Emma's eyes were open, wide and terrified, hands moving in frantic signs that Victoria couldn't process fast enough. The panic, the speed, the medical terminology she didn't know, it all combined into incomprehensible noise that made Victoria's chest tight with failure. Severe dehydration and heat exhaustion. Not life-threatening, but we're keeping her overnight for observation and fluid replacement. The doctor's calm professionalism didn't touch the terror Victoria saw in Emma's face. Her daughter was signing something urgent, desperate, and Victoria understood maybe 30% through the panic. I can't understand her when she's this upset. I'm still learning ASL. The admission cost Victoria something. Pride and pretense stripped away. Does she have anyone else who can interpret? Victoria thought about the last 3 weeks of deliberate distance, about pride and anger and the fight in the library. Then she thought about Emma's fear and her own inadequacy and the fact that none of the adult complications mattered when your child needed help. She pulled out her phone, found Daniel's number, hit dial before doubt could interfere. Victoria? His voice was cautious, surprise evident. Emma's in the hospital. She's okay, but she's terrified and signing too fast for me to understand. Can you come? The pause lasted maybe 3 seconds, but felt eternal. I'm on my way. Mark's voice in the background, concern and understanding. Go, I'll cover your calls. Daniel arrived 25 minutes later, still in his work uniform, grease stains on his pants and concern etched across his face. He went straight to Emma without acknowledging Victoria first, crouched beside the gurney at eye level. His hands moved in the calm, practiced patterns that Emma's panic needed. Emma, I'm here. You're okay. Tell me what you're scared of. Emma's hands flew through signs that were still too fast, but Daniel caught them, processed them, responded with patient reassurance. She thinks she's dying like her father did. She remembers the hospital from when she was 2. She thinks hospitals mean death. Victoria's heart cracked clean through, guilt and grief flooding in equal measure. Tell her she's safe. Tell her I'm not leaving. Daniel's hands translated, and Emma's terror scaled down from critical to manageable. She reached for Victoria's hand with grip that was surprisingly strong for someone hooked to IV fluids. Victoria signed with improving confidence. I love you. You're safe, I stay. Emma's eyes filled with tears that spilled over, but her body relaxed incrementally against hospital pillows. The hours that followed existed in the strange temporal distortion that hospitals created, where time moved differently than the outside world. Daniel stayed translating when Emma needed complex communication, sitting quiet support when she just needed presence. Victoria held her daughter's hand and thought about how close she'd come to missing this, to being too proud or too angry or too stubborn to call the one person who could help. Evening settled over Pittsburgh while Emma slept fitfully, exhaustion and medication pulling her under. Victoria and Daniel sat in chairs that were designed to be uncomfortable enough to prevent actual rest, positioned on opposite sides of the bed like bookends. "Thank you for coming. I didn't know what she was saying." Victoria's voice was barely above whisper, conscious of Emma's shallow sleep. "You called. That was the right choice. Asking for help isn't failure." Daniel's voice held no judgment, just a simple observation of someone who'd learned that lesson himself. "I got 47 missed calls from work today. There was supposed to be a crucial merger meeting. I didn't even look at my phone. And I don't care. Emma was in the hospital. Nothing else mattered." The admission felt bigger than the words themselves, recognition of priority shift that had been happening slowly over months and crystallized in the moment of crisis. "That's what you said you'd do. Choose Emma over work." I almost lost her today. Not really, but in my head. All I could think was, what if something had happened before I'd learned to really talk to her? Daniel's expression softened with understanding that came from watching his own sister die. "But nothing happened. She's fine. You're here. That's what counts." Victoria's phone buzzed with another notification. Board members probably, CFO definitely. People who needed decisions and answers, and the version of Victoria who put company first. She silenced it without looking, turned the phone face down on the hospital tray table. 3 months ago, you asked me how long I was going to wait. You said Rachel's father thought he had time. Victoria looked at Daniel directly. No masks, no professional distance. "Today I realize we never have as much time as we think we do." The pause held weight, everything unspoken, suddenly urgent. "I don't want you to go to Cleveland." The words came out raw, unplanned, honest. "I know what you think, that we're from different worlds, that you're not enough because you're working class and I'm CEO. But you're wrong. You're the one who taught me how to be a mother. You're the one Emma trusts. You're the one who showed me that being present matters more than being successful." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Daniel's breath caught audible even over the monitor beeps. "So I'm asking, please don't go. Not for Emma, not even for Tyler. For me." The hospital room held the confession like a third presence, witness to vulnerability that neither of them had intended to show. "I'm scared." Daniel's voice was barely audible, admission that cost him something. "Of what?" "That 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you'll realize the class difference matters. That you'll resent me for not being able to provide the lifestyle you deserve." "I have money, Daniel. What I don't have is someone who sees me as more than CEO, someone who calls me out when I'm wrong, someone who makes me want to be better." Victoria reached across Emma's sleeping form, took his hand. "I'm not asking you to take care of me financially. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, the person who keeps me grounded while I keep us secure." Daniel's thumb traced patterns on her palm, unconscious gesture that felt intimate despite the hospital setting. "I love you too. I've been fighting it for weeks because I was too scared to believe someone like you could want someone like me. Not someone like me, just me. Victoria, who's imperfect and trying and falling in love with an HVAC technician who's the best man I've ever known." They kissed across Emma's hospital bed, gentle and careful and full of promise that felt more solid than contracts or projections or any business deal Victoria had ever negotiated. Emma's hands moved in weak signs from the bed, eyes barely open. "Finally, took you long enough." Both adults broke apart, laughing through tears, while Emma smiled with satisfaction that was pure 8-year-old smugness. "You were awake?" Emma's signs were slower, tired, but clear enough. "You're not quiet when you argue, and you were very loud about loving each other." Victoria smoothed Emma's hair back, Signed with improving fluency. Is that okay with you? Daniel and me? Emma's expression was answer before her hands moved. Tyler and I have been planning this for weeks. Obviously, it's okay. The certainty in her signs, the casual acceptance, the complete lack of surprise, all of it suggested that the children had been several steps ahead of the adults in recognizing what was inevitable. Daniel pulled out his phone, texted with one hand while holding Victoria's with the other. Telling Cleveland thank you, but I'm staying in Pittsburgh. My family is here. Tyler's response came through immediately, all caps enthusiasm that made Daniel's smile visible, even in the hospital's fluorescent lighting. Emma signed something that made both adults pause. What did she say? She wants to know if Tyler will be her brother now. Victoria looked at Daniel, found matching uncertainty about how to answer that question honestly without making promises they hadn't discussed. Eventually, yeah, if things work out the way we hope. Emma's smile was pure contentment, and she drifted back into sleep with the peace of someone whose world had finally aligned the way she'd been hoping. August 15th arrived with Daniel calling Cleveland's corporate office to officially decline the promotion. His boss was disappointed but understanding, mentioned that Pittsburgh had openings for senior technicians if Daniel wanted advancement without relocation. Mark brought celebratory coffee to the morning briefing and clapped Daniel on the shoulder with affection that didn't require words. You made the right choice, I know. Doesn't make it less terrifying. Best decisions usually are. Victoria's phone rang that afternoon with Thornton's name on the screen. Timing that felt like the universe's sense of humor. Victoria, about that meeting you missed last week, I found a replacement investor, smaller deal, 40 million instead of 80, but sustainable. Partnership, not takeover. You keep control. Victoria processed the words, felt relief and surprise in equal measure. Robert, I'm sorry I missed. Don't be, I called the hospital. They told me your daughter was there. You made the right choice. The pause held significance. That's actually why I'm moving forward. I want to partner with someone who has their priorities straight. Someone who understands that companies are replaceable, but children aren't. Thank you. Victoria's voice was thick with emotions she didn't try to hide. Bring your family to the signing next month. I'd like to meet the man who taught you work-life balance. The weeks between August and December accumulated with the specific momentum of lives aligning instead of colliding. Daniel got promoted to senior training technician in Pittsburgh. Raise that wasn't Cleveland level, but enough to ease budget pressures. Victoria stepped back slightly from day-to-day CEO operations, hired a chief operating officer to handle minutiae while she focused on strategy and being home for dinner. Emma and Tyler became functionally inseparable, sleepovers alternating between Victoria's penthouse and Daniel's house with the easy comfort of siblings in training. Victoria's ASL reached conversational fluency, Sarah Chen's demanding instruction finally achieving breakthrough where Victoria stopped translating and started thinking in visual language patterns. November arrived with the company holiday party invitation, full circle moment that Victoria recognized immediately. Morgan Tech Solutions annual celebration. December 1st, Grandview Hotel, families welcome. She showed Daniel the invitation over Saturday morning coffee while their children argued about whether Pluto deserved planet status. Same hotel as the gala where we met. Want to come? As my date? In front of 200 employees and investors? Daniel's expression cycled through surprise and pleasure and slight anxiety. You sure? That's pretty public. I'm sure. I want people to meet the man who changed my life. The implication hung between them. Relationship that had progressed from confrontation to friendship to love over 8 months, now ready for public declaration. Tyler's gonna need a suit. Daniel's practical observation made Victoria laugh. So will you, and before you argue about affording it, I'm buying. Early Christmas gift, non-negotiable. The argument Daniel started died before fully forming, recognition that accepting help wasn't weakness. That partnership meant allowing someone to contribute even when it pushed against pride. December 1st arrived with Pennsylvania winter that had finally committed to actual cold. Emma wore green velvet that matched her eyes. Tyler wore a junior suit that made him look impossibly grown up. Daniel wore navy that fit perfectly and made him look like someone who belonged anywhere he chose to be. The Grandview Hotel ballroom glittered with the same crystalline elegance it had in March. But Victoria entered through the front entrance instead of service corridors. Daniel's arms steady under her hand. Emma and Tyler flanked them, family unit that would have been unthinkable 8 months ago. Staff reactions ranged across spectrum from surprised to judgmental to genuinely pleased. Victoria watched people process, watched calculations happen behind polite smiles, watched some decide the relationship was scandalous, while others found it heartwarming. She didn't care about either response. The evening unfolded with Victoria introducing Daniel to executives and investors with pride that wasn't performative. This is Daniel Carter. He's a climate control systems expert and volunteers teaching ASL. He's the reason Emma and I can actually talk to each other now. Thornton appeared mid-evening, assessed Daniel with eyes that had evaluated hundreds of potential partners over 6 decades in business. So you're the famous Daniel Carter. Victoria credits you with saving her family. Daniel met his gaze directly, no deference, just honest response. She did the work. I just pointed out what mattered. Humility. Rare in this room. What do you do, Daniel? I'm an HVAC technician. I keep buildings comfortable and systems running. The admission came without shame, simple statement of fact that carried no apology. Honest work. My father was a plumber. Built his company from one truck. Never forgot where he came from. Thornton extended his hand with genuine respect that transcended class boundaries. Welcome to the family, so to speak. Emma and Tyler gravitated toward other employees' children, natural social organizers, who quickly established games involving basic ASL instruction. Within 20 minutes, a dozen kids were learning hello, friend, fun, thank you, while their parents watched with expressions ranging from charmed to impressed. Emma stood at the center of positive attention, confident and happy, teaching with patient enthusiasm. Tyler translated when kids struggled, seamless bilingualism that made language barriers seem silly and arbitrary. A woman approached Victoria mid-evening, someone from accounting whose name Victoria should remember but didn't. Your daughter is remarkable and so patient with the children. Victoria signed to Emma across the room, fluid and natural. Mrs. Chen says you're doing great teaching the kids. Emma signed back with the rapid confidence of her first language. It's fun. They want to learn, Victoria interpreted aloud for Mrs. Chen. Watch the woman's face register surprise at Victoria's fluency. Your ASL has come so far. I remember when you couldn't sign at all. I had good motivation to learn, and a demanding teacher who didn't let me make excuses. Victoria's eyes found Daniel across the room, caught his gaze, held it. Near the evening's end, with most guests transitioning toward departure, Victoria found herself alone with Daniel near the same table where Emma had sat isolated 8 months previous. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. 8 months ago, I stood in this ballroom thinking I had everything. Successful company, beautiful daughter, perfect life. Victoria's voice was quiet, meant only for Daniel. Then you crouched down and signed to my daughter, and I realized I had nothing that mattered. I had money but no connection, power but no presence, success but no family. She took his hand, public gesture that would be noted and discussed and ultimately accepted or not according to each observer's values. You taught me that the most valuable things can't be bought. They have to be built with time, effort, patience, love. So no, I don't care what people think about you being just an HVAC tech. You're the man who saved my family. You're my hero. Daniel pulled her close, kissed her in the middle of the ballroom with 200 witnesses. Some applause, some gasps, general acknowledgement that boundaries had been crossed and new territory claimed. Well, that's one way to go public. Daniel's voice held humor and nervousness in equal measure. I wanted to make sure everyone understood. You're not a secret. You are not something I'm ashamed of. You're my partner, my choice, the person I'm building a life with. Thornton materialized at Victoria's elbow with timing that suggested he'd been waiting for this specific moment. Victoria, the partnership papers are signed, but more importantly, you've achieved something I value more than profit. Balance, happiness, family. His gaze encompassed Daniel, Emma, Tyler. That's real success. Money comes and goes. But what you've built here, that's permanent, worth protecting. The drive home through December snow that made Pittsburgh look clean, impossible, felt like ending and beginning simultaneously. Emma dozed in the back seat while Tyler provided running commentary about the evening's highlights until he too succumbed to exhaustion. You think they'll remember this when they're older? Daniel's question was contemplative, focused on futures that extended beyond tonight. I think they will remember that adults who loved them chose each other, that family got created through intention instead of obligation, that bridges can be built across any distance if both people are willing to do the work. Victoria's hand found his across the center console. I think they'll remember that their parents were brave enough to choose love over practicality. That's worth remembering. 1 year later, December 25th arrived with Tyler and Emma's internal alarm clocks operating in synchronized chaos. Daniel felt the dual assault on his mattress. Two 8-going-on-9-year-olds who'd spent the night planning their Christmas morning attack. Wake up, presents! Emma's signs were emphatic even without voice accompaniment. Tyler's verbal enthusiasm provided stereo effect. Victoria stirred beside Daniel, groaned into her pillow with the theatrical suffering of someone who'd been up late assembling complex toys and now regretted that choice. What time is it? Too early. Go back to bed. Daniel's attempt at parental authority landed exactly nowhere. No! Both children, perfectly synchronized, dragged them vertical through force of will and momentum. The house in Squirrel Hill was compromise incarnate. 4 bedrooms that gave everyone space, backyard where kids could play, neighborhood that split the difference between Victoria's penthouse and Daniel's Lawrenceville starter. They'd moved in together in August, 6 months of relationship that everyone agreed was moving fast but felt inevitable. Christmas morning chaos involved torn wrapping paper and excited discoveries in Tyler's enthusiasm over a fossil excavation kit that would probably create permanent mess. Emma's telescope was professional grade, her passion for astronomy now encouraged rather than ignored. They were happy in the uncomplicated way children could be when adults stopped making everything difficult. Victoria and Daniel found moments of quiet in the kitchen while the kids explored their gifts, coffee, and companionship that had become their morning ritual. I need to show you something. Daniel's voice carried weight that made Victoria's attention sharpen. He pulled a small velvet box from the cabinet where he'd hidden it 3 weeks ago, hoped Victoria hadn't been searching for mixing bowls, and stumbled across it accidentally. When I met you 8 months ago, I thought you were cold, distant, impossible to reach. Daniel opened the box, revealed a ring that was tasteful without being ostentatious, meaningful without being show-off expensive. I was wrong. You weren't cold. You were frozen in fear, guilt, perfectionism. Watching you thaw, watching you learn to connect with Emma, watching you become the mother she needed, that's when I fell in love with you. His hands shook slightly, nerves and hope and vulnerability all visible. Not the CEO, not the powerful businesswoman, just Victoria, the woman who cries watching her daughter sign about stars, the woman who practices ASL in the shower, the woman who chose her kid over a merger. I don't have much to offer compared to what you're used to. I can't buy you diamonds or mansions, but I can offer you partnership, respect, love, and a family that sees you for who you really are. Will you marry me? Victoria's answer came through tears that were joy and relief and absolute certainty. Yes, absolutely yes. The kiss was interrupted by children who'd obviously been eavesdropping, Tyler and Emma exploding into the kitchen with excitement that shook the foundations. She said yes, we're gonna be a real family. Emma's signs were so enthusiastic they required full arm movements. Tyler's verbal accompaniment provided translation unnecessary for anyone watching. We're already a real family, buddy. This just makes it official. Daniel pulled both kids into the hug, 4 people who'd found each other through crisis and built something solid through choice. Later that evening, after the chaos settled into comfortable exhaustion, Victoria found Emma in her room with sketchbook open. The drawings that had once mapped distance now illustrated connection, but Victoria was curious what new images Emma created now that the bridge was complete. What are you drawing? Emma held up the page, smiled with satisfaction at her artistic representation. 4 stick figures holding hands, no black line anywhere. Bridge underneath them solid and permanent. Stars above because Emma's love for astronomy demanded celestial witness. House below because home mattered. Caption in careful print, my family complete, it's beautiful. Victoria signing with fluent ease. No hesitation, no translation required. It's real, we're whole now. Emma's signs carried contentment that 8-year-olds only achieved when their world finally made sense. Yes, we're whole. The word settled in Victoria's chest with weight and warmth, descriptor that had eluded her for years but now felt permanently achieved. Evening found 4 of them on the back deck, despite December cold, telescopes set up for Emma's enthusiasm about winter constellations. She explained Jupiter's moons and the orbital mechanics of the solar system, while Tyler asked questions that demonstrated genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. Daniel and Victoria stood close for warmth and connection. Watch their children discuss astronomy in the universal language of curiosity that transcended hearing or deafness. You know what I realized? Daniel's voice was quiet, meant only for Victoria. My father spent his whole life ashamed of being working class. Thought he wasn't good enough because he didn't wear a suit. But you taught me something. A man's value isn't in his title or paycheck. It's in his character, his integrity, how he treats the people he loves. I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm proud of who I am, proud of the work I do, proud of the family we built. Victoria's hand found his, squeezed with understanding that came from her own journey. And you taught me that success without family is just empty, that being present is worth more than being perfect. We saved each other, Daniel. You gave me my daughter back. I gave you permission to be proud of yourself. That's what love is, making each other whole. They watched Tyler and Emma argue about Pluto's planetary status with the passionate intensity of children who'd been having this debate for months and would probably continue having it for years. The argument was comfortable, familiar, the kind of sibling friction that indicated deep affection. They're going to argue about this forever. Daniel's observation held amusement and resignation. Good. That means they'll be in each other's lives forever, like us. Victoria turned to face him directly, city lights behind her, future stretching forward. Like us. The snow that had threatened all day finally began falling, fat flakes that caught streetlight and transformed Pittsburgh into something magical. Inside their home, warmth and laughter and the specific sounds of family that neither Daniel nor Victoria had expected to find, but both had fought to create. Daniel's phone buzzed with text from Mark, who'd become integrated into their expanding family through proximity and genuine friendship. Heard you proposed, about damn time. Proud of you, brother. You found someone who sees what I always saw, a good man worth loving. Congrats. Daniel showed Victoria the message, watched her smile with affection for the friend who'd pushed Daniel toward bravery when fear wanted to win. Mark's right. You are worth loving, so are you. The simplicity of the exchange belied the journey both had taken to reach this point. The walls torn down and bridges built, and courage summoned, when staying frozen would have been easier. Inside, Tyler was teaching Emma the rules of a board game while Emma explained why the rules were logically inconsistent. Their argument was conducted in fluid bilingual communication, signing and speaking overlapping in ways that made language barriers seem like choices rather than inevitabilities. This is what I want, forever. Victoria's voice held certainty that 8 months ago would have been impossible. Commitment that terrified her precisely because it mattered so much. Good, because forever is what I'm offering. Daniel's answer was simple, solid, the kind of promise that HVAC technicians made because they understood systems and foundations and the importance of things staying functional under pressure. They stood in the cold and watched their children through the window, 2 people who'd collided over a lonely child at a charity gala and built something neither had anticipated. The city stretched around them, indifferent to their small story of connection and choice and love that had overcome class differences and personal fear and the accumulated damage of years spent choosing wrong things. But in this small house in Squirrel Hill, on Christmas evening, while snow fell and children argued and futures aligned, Daniel Carter and Victoria Morgan held each other and understood that the most important systems weren't HVAC units or corporate mergers. They were families built deliberately, relationships maintained through effort, love demonstrated through showing up even when scared. Rachel's ghost finally rested quiet, her death teaching lessons that prevented others from losing what she'd lost. Tyler had the family he'd hoped for when he asked if Emma could come over that first Saturday. Emma had parents who spoke her language and siblings who saw her as whole. Victoria had learned that empires meant nothing without connection. Daniel had learned that his worth existed independently of paychecks or class status. Four people who might never have intersected except for broken HVAC systems and charity obligations, and one stranger brave enough to crouch beside a lonely child and offer communication. The black line from Emma's early drawings was gone now, replaced by bridges strong enough to carry them all into futures that couldn't be predicted, but could be built. One choice at a time, one sign at a time, one day at a time. That's how you cross chasms. That's how you build bridges. That's how you learn to speak languages of love when you've spent years speaking only languages of fear and avoidance and desperate self-protection. Emma had been waiting 8 years for her mother to learn this lesson. Tyler had been waiting for his father to believe he was enough. Daniel had been waiting to let go of inherited shame. Victoria had been waiting to discover that presence mattered more than presence. And in the space between isolation and integration, between silence and communication, between the parents they'd been and the parents they'd become, something miraculous had happened. They'd learned to talk to each other, really talk. In ASL and English, in the universal languages of showing up and trying and choosing love over fear. And that made all the difference.